Welcome to the beautiful Four Seasons Hotel at Limassol in Cyprus. We've been here all week meeting advisors to high net worth clients and investors. We've learnt the latest trends from the world of funds, trust and corporate services, residence and relocation. I'm delighted to be speaking today with Alkis Hajittofis, who is Executive Director and Head of Portfolio Management at Resolute Investment Management here in Cyprus, and also Panos Hadjuchristofis, who is a Director of Resolute Asset Management here in Cyprus. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we get into the discussion today about the funds industry in Cyprus and on the real estate sector as well, it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more about you and your background and focus at Resolute.
David, thanks for inviting us to this chat. Pleasure to be finally meeting you in person following our previous chat last year. So I'm an Executive Director and Head of Portfolio Management at Resolute Investment Management, as you mentioned. What my role is in particular is running the fund management company, creating investment strategies for funds that are real estate or real estate related, and basically generating returns for our potential investors. So my background is I'm a chartered accountant and a CFA charter holder. I've worked in the funds industry for the last close to a decade. And before that, my background was as a financial controller and investment advisor to a high net worth investor. At Resolute, basically, Resolute is a large group of companies which operates as a single entity to a large extent. We are a leading real estate management and advisory company across Europe and the Middle East and North Africa. We employ something close to around 200 professional staff, many of which are real estate or financial professionals. We have managed since inception close to 70 billion euros in real estate and real estate related loans, and we advise on those loans in particular. The group is, as I mentioned, operating in 10 countries, but in many others as well in Europe and the Middle East. However, we also have a number of other entities which are part of the group. We have a prop tech spin-off of our data science team, and this prop tech software that we have called Recognight provides AI and automation initiatives and software which assists real estate managers or real estate owners, and basically it's a fantastic tool because it's been developed by real estate professionals for real estate professionals. We have a agency which operates in Cyprus and in Greece, and this agency called Reinvest does the traditional agency, so finding tenants and finding buyers for properties, but also provides project management and property management services in these two countries. And finally, we have the entity that I am one of the two executive directors of, and that is Resolute Investment Management. We are an alternative investment fund manager, or AIFM. We have been licensed by the Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission. However, we have a European license, and so we can manage funds in Europe, in Cyprus in particular, or worldwide. And we can market units, and that means basically just find investors for the units of these funds in Cyprus or in the EU. So we've got a wide license. We focus predominantly on real estate and real estate related strategies. However, we can manage funds which have private equity, hedge fund strategies such as distressed and recoveries, and credit asset-backed lending, fund of funds, and venture capital.
Okay, great. And many of our contacts who we've spoken to over the course of this week have explained that the Cyprus funds industry over the course of less than a decade has really gathered substantial assets under administration. Perhaps you could give us a sense of the regulatory environment here and a typical structure fund managers might use.
Sure. So you've correctly mentioned that Cyprus has grown from something like $1 billion or $2 billion in its initial year to something close to 12 billion in assets under management as of the latest statistics. Cyprus in particular, a Cypriot structure normally starts with the fund manager. So we've got a number of different funds which are registered in Cyprus. We've got the regular AIF, or Alternative Investment Fund, the RAIF, which is a registered alternative investment fund, and an AIF LMP for limited number of persons. I'll omit that one because that's not the type that we manage. We manage the first two. They're very similar in terms of what they can do, with just some minor differences. So an AIF and a RAIF both can be for unlimited number of investors. They can both be open or closed-ended. They're both available in the same legal structures that are well known and used in many other jurisdictions, such as partnership funds, corporate funds with fixed capital, variable capital, common partnerships and common funds in general. But there's also some differences between the two. The two main differences is that one is fully regulated, the AIF. The RAIF is regulated through the fund manager and through their license. And the difference, which is caused by this, let's say, not so direct regulation on the RAIF, is that the setup is much quicker. So you have a RAIF which can be set up over the course of, say, 2 or 3 months, as opposed to an AIF which takes potentially 6 months or more, depending on how busy the Securities and Exchange Commission are when they're authorizing things. So it's they do their best to get things done quickly, but unfortunately, or maybe it is a fortune, it's a good problem to have, let's say, is that Cyprus is picking up steam in terms of funds being registered, and so they're very busy at the moment. There are a couple of final differences between the two. The first is that an AIF has no limitation on its investment strategy, whereas a RAIF does have a couple of limitations. The limitations, one of which is being resolved now, but the second is that you can't have a money market fund being registered as a RAIF. The second difference between the two is that an AIF needs to have a minimum amount of share capital, whereas a RAIF has no such requirements. The difference between how a structure will normally occur is that the fund manager will sit at the top, and a fund manager provides certain services to a fund. The core services that fund managers provide, and all fund managers provide them in-house, is portfolio management and risk management. And they also provide AML services, so that will be AML on investors, but also AML on transactions and the counterparties involved in the transactions. And we know AML is a really important part of business nowadays, especially when there are sanctions and matters changing on a dynamic basis, sometimes even twice a week. So you need to be abreast with these matters. Coming back to the core services, if a fund manager wishes, they can delegate one of those two functions to a third party. So let's say, for example, I want to have a specific portfolio manager for one of my funds because it's a fund which invests into a different jurisdiction where I'm not based physically. I can do a delegation of the portfolio management function, but I can't delegate both functions because then a fund manager will be considered to be a letterbox entity and then your license is revoked. There are also ancillary services which are provided by fund managers. These ancillary services are valuation, fund administration, like our friends at Trident Trust, for example. Then there's also internal audits and compliance. Many of these functions are delegated depending on who you are and the size of your operations, or sometimes just because you want to have an expert providing you with, let's say, a valuation, and it adds credibility to the overall fund by having an expert doing it rather than just doing it in-house and trying to keep economies of scale. The fund manager sits on top of the fund and provides these fund management services, the portfolio management and the risk management. And then the fund will be set up depending on how it is. So both an AIF and a RAIF can be standalone structures, so a fund which holds its investments directly or through SPVs, or could be an umbrella structure. So you'll have sub-funds, each with its own investment strategy. So in the case of real estate, you could have one which invests into commercial, the second one into residential, a third into, let's say, distressed commercial. You can really have like a breakdown and dive deep into the investment strategies through matters like that. And then the SPVs will be placed underneath, or the direct investments directly underneath the sub-fund. The structure is finalized normally by the investment committee. So in Cyprus, we do two kinds of fund management. We have active fund management where, for example, we try to create a portfolio of, in the case of Resolute, a portfolio of real estate which has a specific investment strategy and to generate specific returns for our investors. And we'll do it through the portfolio management department together with our colleagues in the asset management, and we'll manage our properties in line with the investment strategy. However, there's also regulatory hosting, which we provide as a jurisdiction, much like many other jurisdictions which are more established or known to many other counterparties abroad. And how this works is that normally you'll have an investment committee at the fund level, which will provide the portfolio manager with some investment options. And in line with the investment strategy, the portfolio management will execute those strategies. Again, the final thing that can occur as part of this structure is, as I mentioned earlier, you may just delegate the portfolio management to someone else and monitor it. One important thing about fund management is that because it's a highly regulated activity, anything that the fund manager delegates to a third party still remains 100% his responsibility or their responsibility.
Okay, is there a sweet spot in terms of size of fund, do you think, in Cyprus? We talked with other contacts this week about being a sweet spot for the small and medium-sized managers. Obviously, larger institutional business is always welcome, but do you think there's an additional advantage in the sort of 100 million to 500 million pound size fund?
I think definitely there's a big benefit. The larger you are, the better it is. In terms of the funds that we manage, you see everything. So we manage funds ranging from 250 million euros to funds which we consider setting up that are in the range of about 10 million euros. I say, first of all, the starting point for any fund has to be somewhere around 10 million euros. And that's because a lot of counterparties work with a floor fee. So anything below 10 million euros starts to burden the investor with, an excessive total expense ratio. Once you start exceeding 10 million euros, and you work your way up into the 50s, into the 100, into the 500 millions, you can then charge some of your expenses, such as your fixed costs, such as your audit expenses or your administration or your depository, become minimal. And so, yes, the larger you are, definitely the better it is. And a second advantage, and I say this, knowing well that Cyprus is trying to attract bigger and more reputable managers and funds and investors to Cyprus, is that Cyprus as a jurisdiction is a new player in the funds industry. If you go to a more established fund jurisdiction and your fund is, let's say, 300 million euros, you may even be looked down upon as a small fund. In Cyprus, though, a fund of, let's say, 20 or 30 million will garner quite a bit of interest, not only from potential managers, but also from the counterparties which are providing services. So I think one of the major benefits of Cyprus is not just that in terms of us being cost effective, and so a larger fund can benefit from this cost effective environment, but also the fact that because we're less established than others, we pay a lot of attention to our clients. And so you'll see service providers normally responding to a fund immediately or within 24 working hours. And so that the bigger you are, the more attention you'll get. And so if you're at that kind of sweet spot that you mentioned earlier, 100 to 500, your work will be done very quickly and I think smoothly.
And I guess with that lower possible entry point, private families, family offices who are looking at fund vehicles to structure transactions, that becomes more feasible for them. And also, I guess, the personalised service and extra attention would be more perhaps meaningful to them. So have you seen activity in the family office space because the ability to run these funds at an economic level, at a smaller size, means they become feasible?
Yep, we have. There's a lot of interest, and it's very correct that you've mentioned. First of all, to just say something, I mean, funds in general are vehicles which are used by more than one investor. Yeah. But we do see it that family offices decide that a fund is a good vehicle. A fund provides a number of benefits. First of all, it can help in terms of estate planning. If you tie it in perhaps with a trust as well on top, it's a good vehicle. At the same time, it also provides a look through in terms of tax purposes. So it provides them with some comfort that they're not doing anything which could be perceived as, aggressive tax planning or whatever. We do see it in terms of having potential family offices trying to set up funds. And I think the benefit of it is that on the one hand, you know that your counterparties are operating under a license. And so if you're upset or you're not pleased with the level of service that you're obtaining from, let's say, your fund manager, you can sack him and appoint another one. Or you know that everyone is accountable for the services that they're providing because you are the investor as the family office. The second thing, which is a benefit for family office funds, is what I mentioned earlier in terms of structuring, that you could have an agreement whereby perhaps you delegate the portfolio management of the fund to one of your trusted advisors, or alternatively, you can appoint yourself as, let's say, the matriarch or the patriarch of the family onto the board of the fund. And so you have some level of control of the assets. You can appoint various family members as investment advisors on the investment committee, and so they all have their say. And you do see it. And again, the difference between, let's say, an alternative investment fund and a mutual fund or a different, just a REIT in particular, is that an alternative investment fund can invest in anything. And so you see family office investors, yes, they do like real estate or they do like equities and bonds, but they also buy fine arts or they buy, whiskey or cars and things like that, properties. And so you can put those into a fund and still use them and they maintain. As long as it's within the range of the investment strategy that has been set up, it's done. One final thing which some family offices do, and this is an interesting one, is that some family offices look to pool their investments. So a reason that you would do this is that, let's say, David, you're the head of your family office and you have not only PCD Club, but you also own, let's say, a brewery. And I'm the head of my family office and I own a car dealership and Panos owns some real estate. Well, we have no diversification there. So what many do is that they pool their investments and now I have a diversified income stream. So I'm now getting some of the brewery and some of the car dealership and some of the real estate revenues. So I've got a lot less risk and I've diversified, slowly exiting my kind of closed position in one investment and gradually broken out into 3 different investment types. Now, there's a level of trust that has to be set forth there, but by appointing an independent fund manager to oversee and to execute the investment strategy, you know that you and I and Panos will all be treated in exactly the same way, because investors in a fund, regardless of if they're a majority investor or a minority, regardless of if it's 99% or 1%, are treated in exactly the same way, because it's an investment strategy and it's a binding contract where the fund manager's client is the fund. It's not David or Alkis or Panos.
Okay. And what about geographically? I mean, Cyprus is an interesting location because you're within Europe, but with great access to the Middle East and India and Far East. Do you see investors and collaboration with investors in those emerging markets? What do you see as a trend?
We do see that. We do see that as a case. I mean, as Resolute, we see a lot of interest, mainly from Europe, because of the fact that that's where our offices and our network is mainly based, even though we do have presence in the Middle East and North Africa. I know that there's been some interest from Israel as of late because there are some benefits tax-wise to setting up a Cyprus entity investing into an Israeli fund, and this can help perhaps attract investors from their favorite jurisdictions, which are the United States, Germany, or the UK. But also, I mean, there are some benefits. You mentioned India earlier, and I think you mentioned that Andreas touched upon it. India is an interesting jurisdiction. They've recently passed an amendment to their investments law, where a fund from Cyprus is now classified as a Category 1 FPI investor. And this provides certain tax benefits to investors investing in Indian equities, predominantly equities, but also in terms of some private equity structures as well. So there's benefits as shorter holding periods for capital gains to basically be beneficial there, and also reduce levels of capital gains tax. And so that's a huge benefit, and some cash flow issues with regards to the payment and holding of tax when you dispose of the underlying investment. So that's another thing that we see. Also, I mean, in terms of structuring, there's been some interest in recent years from China into setting up structures to provide Chinese investors with options to invest into Europe. Cyprus is a option for some of these countries because of the double tax treaties that we have with many of them.
Okay, and finally, I mean, what do you see as the future of the fund administration business here in Cyprus? What is it that you've got in the toolkit that you like? What would you like to see developed? Where do you think it could go?
I think that Cyprus has got a lot of interesting tools here that we could utilize and grow. I think in terms of where we stand as a jurisdiction, we've been focusing a lot on regulatory hosting at the moment. However, we do have companies and professionals who are able to provide active management services. So as I mentioned earlier, Resolute do provide the holistic service of fund management, asset management. We can even do the property management for any type of fund, whether it's distressed real estate or real estate loans, or whether it's performing real estate, such as like a commercial building or something like that. And we can operate in multiple countries. What I'd like to see in Cyprus is something which is currently underway, and that's the implementation of a more solid partnerships law. The Securities and Exchange Commission have identified this, and I believe that the law is currently being reviewed in terms of the partnership law is being reviewed by the Parliament at the moment. And I think that will give us a good advantage because so far, Cyprus as a jurisdiction has been well known that we've got a UK common law based regulation over here. And so by having also a proper partnership funds law will help attract business from countries like the UK or the more Anglo-Saxon investors, because that's what the kind of partnership law is, the one that they normally use in terms of funds. We also have the corporate law, which is good and it works very well for us, and we like it, and I think the investors that are here like it as well, and it's common in many of the let's say more Western Europe, but not the UK. You see that often there. Another thing which I think will be a big beneficial thing to Cyprus is the more international companies that gradually come here. So we've heard recently a large international fund administrator and depository has moved to Cyprus. The more depositories we see, I think, moving over here will be a good thing. The more international players that move here will be a good thing. And we've seen that. I mean, we say this as Resolute because we know the international players who are here in Cyprus, but I mean, and perhaps Panos will touch upon it later, but that is that there are already institutional players moving into Cyprus. We see PIMCO has made investments here, Apollo Global have made investments here. And so the more international presence that we get from internationally renowned companies, the better it will be for us to help grow our offering.
Well, thank you, Alkis. Panos, just to bring you in, it'd be very interesting to hear a little bit more about your background and your focus at Resolute.
Hi, David. Thanks for the invite. So I'm a director at Resolute Asset Management. I'm specializing in REO asset management, dealing with projects involving non-performing loan packages acquired by private equities. In my Resolute life, we've assisted a major banking institution in setting up a real estate department. Now we're working with private equity companies, helping them managing day-to-day their REO assets, in improvising and presenting monetization strategies to increase the potential of the assets. My training, I was trained as an architect, a chartered architect, worked abroad. Now I'm focusing more on sustainability, ESG, which is also something that's we're working together with Alkis, trying to see what the interest is in Cyprus and in the EU.
On the sustainability side then, is that something that's now really something that investors are looking at and measuring in their strategies?
I do think that post-pandemic, there's a lot of focus, and this is cross-reference with our agency Reinvest, where we actually see that clients are asking for grade A or assets that have some metrics in terms of light, in terms of conditions, in terms of ventilation, to ensure that there's a safe working environment for the employees to lure them back. So we see that in some clients, yes.
Very interesting. I mean, for those less familiar with the Cyprus real estate market, perhaps you could give us a characterization of how you see it, and particularly looking at the commercial real estate side, but also how it relates to residential.
So, the trends lately we see the geopolitical side, both with the recent war in Russia and Ukraine. We see people. We're having a lot of demand of people relocating companies, but that's having also an effect on the residential market, because obviously people will need accommodation as well. So we see that developing as a trend. We'll see how it evolves through this year. We see people relocating from other jurisdictions like Lebanon because of the situation there, identifying opportunities, setting up companies that move into real estate development. We've seen recently some interest in industrial assets because of companies relocating from Asia. Given the pandemic situation in Asia and China, they prefer to be closer so that they have greater access, both on production and on the markets, because maybe they're selling in the EU, so they want to keep production and their sales close at hand.
So you're seeing new headquartering, that kind of relocation coming to the island and being set up?
We've seen some companies, we've seen some payment services type of companies that moved to Nicosia to set up their headquarters. There was a recent announcement for a big investment arm moving to Cyprus, their EU headquarters. So we've seen a lot of technology companies, Forex, especially in Limassol. So there is that demand, and the ask now is to actually match the demand to the supply, which is also a big challenge, given that the commercial sector only constituted around 3% in terms of volume and about 5% in terms of value for the last year. So to give you an idea, as it compares to residential, which is about 70% of the market. So there's a small chunk, but it's growing, and the ask is to actually match that demand by producing the supply, which also has a lead time. So the ones that have projects in the pipeline or at developed stage will benefit much more than the ones that will have to go in and develop them going forward.
And you've got a strong knowledge and interest around distressed real estate. And I suppose that's part of the story here, is that those looking to move headquarters want specific styles of property or have specific needs, and then it's looking at turning around some of the stock that's there. So perhaps you give us a sense of...
That's true. We're trying with the distressed assets to see if something would fit some of the leads that we have in terms of people moving from abroad, whether we're trying to see if there can be a value add action that will prepare the asset for such a request. So if you have, let's say, also repurposing the asset class. So for example, you might have an old supermarket that doesn't operate anymore as such, but given the characteristics that it has an open plan, that it probably has a facility for some services to be easily installed, then you can repurpose that as an asset with minimal changes. You can repurpose that as an asset that can be leased out as offices. So, you need to look at other asset classes to satisfy if there is a requirement for a large area that you cannot satisfy with the current supply. Then you need to think out of the box on how you can provide that.
Because I guess in leisure and tourism as well, through the last couple of years has been obviously hit through COVID, and I guess that might have made previously good assets fall into this category depending on their funding, but then they might look long term and say, well, actually, we need to repurpose some of these assets. Are you seeing anything coming out of the tourism sector, or too early to tell?
I've seen during COVID how this type of units, this type of leisure assets repurpose themselves in terms of the use. So the type of client that would come and stay for, let's say, a week, you would see people that, because of the restriction that they had, they would prefer to move here a bit more mid-term. So instead of coming, let's say, for a week to go on holiday, you just come for 6 months, work remotely, and enjoy the nice weather. So that's a nice way that they manage to increase their capacity. So let's say if you are stuck indoors, you prefer to be stuck somewhere that you can actually enjoy the weather, absolutely. Or,
Yeah, the digital nomad is something that now is coming up, and I suppose they need a different product, don't they, to the traditional tourism product?
So those ones, we actually see more interest in Paphos district because of its actually it's more accessible in terms of rents, because these guys are looking for maybe lower rents, a nice working environment, some level of facilities. So obviously this would be harder to accommodate in Limassol or in Larnaca. So that we see a drive in the digital nomads more in Paphos. So there's a small ecosystem developing there. The technology companies are in Limassol. So even if you're cooperating with some of the technology companies in Limassol, you can still commute, drive, or do some days remotely and go into the office as well.
And the commercial real estate is spread across the island, is it? Or is it funneled into Nicosia, Limassol? Or geographically across the island, how does it break down?
The major commercial hubs is Nicosia and Limassol. Nicosia because of its administration center capacity as a seat of the government and many public services. So companies that find that relationship with government services is important to keep, they prefer to locate in Nicosia. Also in terms of who they want to attract as employees, that's also important. We see Limassol being established more as a technology, forex, payment system, even video game type of companies, preferring Limassol for its lifestyle. And as you start to develop a small ecosystem of companies, then you see that everyone attracts the next company is attracted by what's there already. So there's a distinct separation between the two.
And you mentioned at the start your background working within the banking industry and working with investors. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more about how you might support fund managers on strategies in Cyprus, or how you generally would interact with those kind of investors.
In terms of both working for a financial institution or a private equity, there's always the end game is to actually monetize those assets. So there's a few ways you can do that. You can actually do that through retail sales, which means that you will identify the buyer that's interested in the assets, depending on the type of assets. For commercial assets, you will be looking at investors looking for, let's say, income producing assets or for their own use. Or you would try and develop a fund structure, which is what we do with Alkis quite often. Try to, instead of looking for a retail investor, you look for more investors looking to buy a certain profile of an asset. For example, that could be an income producing asset. So you would pull together certain commercial assets, look at the returns, and get the seller to buy into this type of structure, and then you look for the investors on the other side to buy into the fund.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, what's the picture in the Cyprus macroeconomy that drives some of the commercial activity? Is it the foreign investors moving headquarters? They're just simply looking for stability in the economy, well-trained labour force, or do trends in the economy feed through into demand on commercial real estate? How do you look at the big picture and then?
I mean, at the moment, the trends are the ones I briefly referred to. So geopolitically, we often have that element in the economy. The ask here is to ensure that these companies stay after conditions change. But as soon as you get companies moving, then you get people, the employees that are being relocated. So that creates more the increase of GDP in terms of the services that you provide to those people. So one leads to another. So as long as you manage to retain the companies by offering the benefits and the advantages that we have, then you're sure to benefit long term, and the real estate market will benefit as a result. Apart from what's happening in terms of geopolitical, we also have, there's a drive a lot with renewable energy, and I have a feeling that in the coming years, both because of the EU regulations that we are part of, such as the net zero policies coming into effect in 2050, the Fit for 55 type of measures that we're driving towards a net zero type of economies, we'll see that this sector becomes more important in terms of production, and with plans of Cyprus connecting into the EU market in terms of electricity production, that will mean that we're not going to be, as we are now, an isolated system of production, but then we can generate income by selling and monetizing on the renewable production in terms of solar production. there are some things that we can be doing on top of what's coming at us, basically, to generate more income streams.
And so, Alkis, how do you see the ESG and sustainability discussion coming into your area on the fund administration side?
All right. Well, first of all, there's a regulatory element to ESG. Funds since 2021, with the implementation of the SFDR directive, have been required to do a number of disclosures and actually factor ESG into their investment process. And that starts from the formulation of the investment strategy, the execution of the investment strategy, all the way down to the reporting. We've also seen it filter in terms of potential investment strategies that various individuals have been looking to set up through their funds. And I think, as Panos correctly mentioned earlier, one of the areas where you are going to see foreign direct investment coming into Cyprus isn't just going to be the real estate market or industry, because we don't really have much industry, I'd say, but you will definitely see it in terms of the renewables. So we're in the process at the moment with one of our business associates. We're in the process of setting up a fund which has a focus on ESG. So it's going to be investing in renewables, not just PV or solar, also a number of different things such as pyrolysis and other renewable energy sources. So this is definitely something that investors are asking for. It's no longer a gimmick. Returns are there for investors that are investing in ESG. If you're looking at, as an investor, you're investing in terms of, or at least as an investment advisor, your duty is that of a fiduciary. So how do I make the best and most correct investment decisions for my investors? And an ESG related strategy in the long term will probably outperform a strategy which invests directly into coal or into petrol or whatever, some kind of fossil fuels. And you're seeing that, investors are gambling on this, or rather are banking on this longer term performance. So ESG, I think, is here to stay, and it's definitely in the fund industry already to a large extent. In Cyprus, we're getting there, but I mean, it's definitely here.
And just to add to Alkis's point, I think we definitely see it through, for example, all the banking institutions have to report on ESG parameters now. So you see that in their annual report, there is quite a bit of space there that refers to ESG, let's say green bonds or other financial products that they're willing to develop so that they address this criteria. So we're hoping that we'll see some investments through that. So if there's the products, people will use them. And then you see that the real estate market will gear towards that if there's more attractive products with more attractive interests, etc.
Great. Well, look, thank you for talking to me today, gentlemen, and I look forward to sharing this with our members. Thank you.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.